Okay. Masechet Eruvin, or on page 94. We have three main topics, but they all have a common theme, which is about breaches in walls that fall down on Shabbat, and whether that changes the status of the area, then means that you cannot carry anymore or not. So we're going to start off with a actually fantastic story, one of my favorite stories, about Rav and Shmuel, who have a wall that falls down on Shabbat. So let's go right into that story and see why I think it's such a great story. Itmar kotel sheben sheteh hasedot shenafal. So we have two courtyards belonging to two people. It might be two individuals or two groups, each made an eruv, and it falls down on Shabbat. Rav Amad en metaltilin bo ela ba'arba amot. Rav says, even though you were allowed to carry beforehand, each in your own courtyard, now that there's no wall in between, each courtyard prohibits each other, and the status does change on Shabbat. And so once you can't carry, you can only carry within 4 amot, as if you didn't make an eruv at all, or as if you're in open space. Ushmal amar ze metaltel ad ikar mechitza, ze metaltel ad ikar mechitza. Shmuel, on the other hand, says it's no problem. It does not change. Since the wall was there when Shabbat started, it doesn't matter if it falls down on Shabbat, you can make believe the wall is still there. And you can carry in your area, in your courtyard, right up to the edge of the partition, and the other guy also can do the same. Okay, so this is a good fundamental machloket, whether the changing circumstances, if it changes on Shabbat, whether that changes the halacha. And now here we see something really fascinating. Rav did not actually say this explicitly. Although we just quoted Rav saying these words, the truth is that he never said that. We, the students, derived it from a story, from something that happened. Right, and this happens a lot when we don't necessarily only learn from our teachers from things that they say, but also things that they do. And I remember one time I saw, right, the rabbi do this and that, and therefore I can infer that he held this. Sometimes learning from a story can be even more powerful because you see, he actually did it himself, right? The problem is sometimes we don't know all the circumstances of why he actually did that, and maybe it's not generalizable to other things. Okay, so it's important, the Talmud says important to point out that he did not actually say this. So from where did we infer it? From the following story. One time Rav and Shmuel, although they lived in different cities, but one time they happened to be near each other on Shabbat, and they were each in their own courtyard, and there was a wall between them, but the wall fell down on Shabbat. Shmuel says, "Oh, go take a cloak and suspend it there and to where the partition was. So make a kind of a temporary partition between us." Rav did not do it. Instead, he turned his face away, kind of ignoring Shmuel and blatantly ignoring Shmuel. So Shmuel says, if Abba was Rav's personal name. He was Rav Abba. Usually we call him for short just Rav, but Shmuel, as his colleague, called him by his first name, Abba. So it says, Abba, if you are particular about this, then take your belt and use your belt to tie the cloak to the partition. All right, some people take this as a kind of a rhetorical statement. It says, oh, you don't like a partition that's too wavy? So take your cloak and make it nice and tight, right? It really, Rav's problem was actually the opposite. So Rav might have two problems here. One is building a partition on Shabbat. Even if it's a temporary partition, he might have objected to that. And then it would make sense. So Rav would say, oh, you don't like a temporary partition? So make it even stronger, right? As if this problem was the opposite. Okay, or Rav might have had a problem because we just said that he thinks that once the partition falls down, you're prohibited from carrying anything, and now he'd have to carry his cloak from the middle of his courtyard to the edge of it in order to create the partition. And so maybe that's his objection. Okay, it could also be he doesn't mean this sarcastically. Maybe he means if you don't want to make a partition that's out of a rope or something, because that's the usual way to do it, make it out of your belt. It's not mukseh. It's you might not making a permanent knot or anything. So make it in some way. Okay, so that's the end of the story. Now, according to Shmuel, why does he need to even make any partition at all? Why do you have to rebuild the partition? Ha'amar ze metaltel ad ikar mechisa veze metaltel ad ikar mechisa. He said, if it falls down, you don't have to worry about it. You can still carry. You don't have to make another one. So the answer is Shmuel Abid Sniuta Ba'alma. You're right. Shmuel didn't think you needed the mechitza in order to carry. He just said, let's have some privacy here between us. So just put it up for privacy. It's not going to change the law. Okay. Verav. Now, Rav, if he thinks that it's prohibited from carrying here, and why didn't he say so? Why did he only turn away his head? Why didn't he say it's not allowed? Don't do that. So the answer is Atre de Shmuel Hava. It was the place of Shemuel. It was in Shemuel's city. And therefore, as a visitor should always be respectful of the host. And so this is why it was one of my favorite stories, because I wrote about it in my dissertation about pluralism of practice. That the rabbis seem to have tolerated, Shemuel has this practice, Rav has this practice. When they're in their own cities, so Rav will be machmir and Shemuel will be mekel. And that's fine. But when you come to visit someone else, then you should be respectful of the host. And so therefore, Rav, since he was in Shemuel's place, wanted to respect Shemuel, and so did not want to disagree with him and outright go against his Pesach. And so that's why he kept quiet. He didn't say anything. Now, okay, if you want to be respectful and follow the place, where you are, why'd you turn away your face? So that other people would not, onlookers would not say, oh, I guess since he was quiet, he must agree with Shemuel, right? And maybe he changed his mind and used to think that it's not allowed to carry anymore with wall falls down. And now he thinks that it is allowed, right? So if he just did that, if he did nothing, people would mistake that. So he did it in between. He turned away his head to show he disagrees, but he didn't go and start arguing with the host in his own place, because you have to have respect for the host. Okay, so that's the end of the story. So it was important to point out that this was made from a generality, from a story we only derived, right? The truth is, if we have only the story by itself, we could theoretically read it differently, that perhaps the problem was, in fact, building a temporary partition on Shabbat. And, it would seem that he's telling him, use your belt instead, if that's what you have a problem with building something. So it might have had nothing to do with actual carrying in each of the courtyards. But the Talmud puts it here in the setting and does read it that way. Okay, so that is the end of that story. And that was one example of walls falling down. So now we continue with the second example of now a breach in a courtyard wall, and that's adjacent to a public domain, and there's also houses inside the wall. We're going to see a machloket between the Rabbi Eliezer and the sages. That is really a very fundamental machloket. They're very far apart. But the Talmud is going to bring them together. It's going to limit the controversy to only a small area. And so in the end, it's going to, although the Rabbi Eliezer seems to say something very extreme, the Talmud is going to reinterpret him to say something that's much closer to what the sages have to say. Okay, so let's see the Mishnah. Chaseh shenifresa l'reshut harabim, hamachnis mitocha l'reshut hayachid, or m'reshut hayachid letocha chayav. So we have a picture here. We had a courtyard, and when Shabbat started, this wall was here, let's say, right? So the wall was here, and we made an eruv, and everything's fine. We can carry inside because the courtyard is considered a reshut hayachid, right? It's all part of together with the homes. Well, that's fine. Now, if the wall falls down, what the Rabbi Eliezer says is, anyone who carries from the home, reshut hayachid, to the courtyard, or from the courtyard into the home, chayav. That means mideoraita. Now, if he says chayav, well, this is reshut hayachid. That means that he considers the courtyard reshut harabim. So here you go. Because it doesn't have a wall, it does in fact change status, and it changes on Shabbat, and it goes from being a Reshut Yachid to a Reshut Rabim. In other words, according to the Rabbi Eliezer, it's defined simply by the architecture, and even though it's not a street, even though people are not walking through this, doesn't matter. Something that's in the open air, doesn't have a roof, and doesn't have four walls, that's called the Reshut Rabim. Which means theoretically, he probably would say that, can you carry from the courtyard to the street? Well, I mean, let's say 4 amot. You can't carry in the street at all, but could you carry just here 4 amot? He probably would say yes, because this is Reshut Rabim, and this is also the Reshut Rabim. Okay, so according to the Eliezer, it does change status on Shabbat, and a courtyard that has missing a wall is considered a Reshut Rabim. That is the first opinion. Hachamim omerim mitocha Reshut Rabim או מרשות הרבים לתוכה פטור, מפני שהיא ככרמלית. So if you carry from within the courtyard to the street, or from the street to the courtyard, patur. Patur means patur aval asur, which means that it's not midoraita, but you cannot do it lechatechila. It's still asur midirabanan. And he says because it's a karmelit. So karmelit, actually, we've discussed this term many times before, but here is actually maybe the earliest place where it actually is found in the Mishnah itself. And so what's he saying? If you carry from here from the courtyard to the street, patur. It's not asur midoraita, right? Now, what would that mean? Well, that would mean that this still remains to some degree like a reshut hayachid. Right? Because if it was a Reshut Rabim, then you'd be able to carry from here to here. So he says it's Karmeli. So he says it's definitely not totally Reshut Rabim, but it's not totally Reshut Yachid. And he says that explicitly. So Karmelit, in this formulation, we usually say, and we've said in the past, Karmelit is something that mid oraita is Reshut Yachid, but mid Rabbanan is treated like Reshut Rabim. But truth is, in this formulation, it seems to be a third category, even midoraita, right? It's because it's karmelit. It's not a Reshut Yachid, it's not a Reshut Rabim. Because what would he say if you went from here to here, right? There's something interesting about the Mishnah. There's something that's not parallel in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer spoke about the case of going from the courtyard to inside the house. We would expect Chachamim to talk about that same case and say, oh, that would be patur, right? He says chayav, Chachamim would say patur. But I think Chachamim don't talk about that case because they want to make an extra point. It's patur to go in the house, but don't think that means that it's chayav if you go in the street, or mutar to go in the street. No, it's patur also to go in the street because it has this in-between status of a karmelit. And so that's the case they talk about. And so therefore, the courtyard, if it's enclosed, is a Reshut Yachid, and then you can carry in and out. Once it's open, it seems to also change status on Shabbat, and it's called Kadamit. Therefore, you are not chayav if you go into the house. That's where they disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, but you're also not chayav if you go into the Reshut Rabim. Okay, so that is the peshat of the Mishnah, I believe. And you see the fundamental disagreement that Rabbi Eliezer has only two categories, the Reshut Yachid, and this are the Reshut Rabim, whereas Chachamim have three categories, the Reshut Yachid, the Reshut Rabim, and Karmelit. Karmelit, you are not chayav for going into either one, but still not allowed to lechatechila. All right, so that is the Mishnah. And now the Gemara is going to ask a question on Rabbi Eliezer. Can you really think? Does he really say so? And we're going to end up making it more limited. Let's see. Rabbi Eliezer, mishum nedifresa l'shut harabim havia l'shut harabim. Hold on, Rabbi Eliezer. Just because a wall fell down and now it's open to the public domain, now it itself becomes public domain? That doesn't make sense. I mean, public domain should be a thoroughfare, like New Jersey Turnpike. Lots of people are going there. This still is, after all, a private courtyard. Does he really think that? So at first we say, in Rabbi Eliezer l'ta'ameh. In fact, he does say that. And look what he says somewhere else. Detanya. Rabbi Yehuda omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Rabim shebareru derech la'atzman, ma shebareru bareru. He says that if a public started walking through someone's field, then and they got used to going there, and they chose a certain path through someone's field, then they acquire it. This is like eminent domain, right? The city can come and say, oh, we need a highway here, sorry, and they start going there. So too, if people are used to taking a shortcut through your backyard, and they do that, for a while, then it belongs to them. You're not allowed to build a wall, and you can't kick them out. So you see that someone's private courtyard can become designated as a reshut harabim. All right, so that in fact follows along with what he says. Hold on, Ini, is that really the same? Rav interpreting that Rabbi Eliezer statement of Rabbi Eliezer says that's only if once upon a time there had been a road there, and then they after a while they forgot where it was, and then they want to come back and say, oh wait, there used to be a road here, right? And so then they choose some path to replace the road that was already there. Only in that case do the public have a right to go and through your field, but not otherwise. So therefore, you can't really say exactly. I mean, assuming we accept the Rav. Of course, Rabbi Eliezer doesn't have to accept the Rav. Rav comes later as an interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer might have really said that yes, they can make a new path. Not only that, they can reopen an old path. Okay, but in any case, assuming that we want to reconcile this with Rav also, so we see that Rabbi Eliezer does not always say that entire Reshut Harabim is open to the public. Entire courtyard is open to the public. So maybe here in our case, in the Mishnah case, also it was the same thing, that there used to be a path going through here, and the people used to be walking around near where that wall is, and then they stopped doing it, they forgot where it was, and now that the wall came down, they began again, they were reclaiming a path. So maybe it means the same thing here. And so to be Eliezer is consistent with his opinion that the public can reclaim a path, and that's why it wouldn't be allowed to carry from the courtyard into the house. All right, yeah, but Rabbi Chanina also said about this Mishnah that the Mishnah is talking about the entire courtyard. They're not talking about only one single path anywhere from the courtyard into the house. Rabbi Eliezer says chayav, Rabbanan say it's okay. And so if you think that's only a little part of it, right? Like, if there was a wall here, now that the wall fell down, the people realize, oh, we used to go around this way, we used to go here, right? So you can't say that because it would only be that path, not the whole courtyard. So that would not be a good answer. So Emma, we're going to answer it. Emma al mekom mechitza machloket. When with this statement of Rabbi Chanina, he said ad mekom, until the wall, meaning the entire courtyard until the wall, maybe change the ad to al. It's just one letter. It kind of maybe sounds the same. And so maybe what he really meant is where the place of the partition is. In other words, the wall, under the wall itself, that is where people used to walk. So in other words, as follows. Once upon a time, some 50 years ago, people used to walk all around here, right where the wall is. Then one day the people came here, moved in, and they built a wall, the people that lived here, and they built a wall right over the place. They kind of, breached, they went 2 feet over the border. That happens, right? And so then people couldn't walk there anymore. But now that the wall falls down, the people are simply reclaiming the right to walk where they already used to walk, and that's why that area is a reshut harabim. But therefore, Rabbi Eliezer only argues on that area. If somebody carries something from where the wall was, where it had fallen down, right, only the floor under it, and carries from there into his house, chayav, because that in fact is reshut harabim. It used to be a path, and now it again is a public path. However, according to this interpretation, if he carries from in the middle of his courtyard, that was never a reshut harabim. People aren't walking there. Then he wouldn't have to worry. In that case, Chachamim, Rabbi Eliezer would agree with Chachamim and say it's okay, you can carry into your house. I mean, patur anyway, if you carry into your house. So you see what we just did? We took Rabbi Eliezer, the pshat, defined all of this as a reshut harabim when the wall falls down. We say, no, he couldn't mean that. He actually agrees with the rabbis, except for this 2-foot wide strip. That's the only thing he disagrees with. Okay, quite a reinterpretation. That's answer number one. The second answer is similar. והיא בהתאמה, בסידי רשות הרבים כמפלגה, דרבי אליעזר סבר, סידי רשות הרבים כרשות הרבים דמו, רבנן סבר, סידי רשות הרבים לאו כרשות הרבים דמו. Perhaps they're not arguing about this little space here, but the space under the wall, but rather the space just next to it. Kind of the shoulder of the street. No. Okay, the shoulder of the street just beyond. And that's what they're talking about. That according to Rabbi Eliezer, he considers the shoulder, right, is like a Reshut Harabim. Although the shoulder is very close to my wall, and I can use it. I put out my garbage cans there and stuff, right? But he considers that part of Reshut Harabim. And Chachamim say no. It's not, because people don't generally walk there. People, what they would do in those days, if I owned this wall, I would put rocks there, boulders, pegs sticking out of the wall, and they would do that on purpose so that people would not walk and bring their wagons right up to the wall. If they did that, the wagons would keep bashing into the wall and harm it. So people claimed a couple of feet beyond the wall to be their own. We could call it the shoulder. And so that's what they were talking about. They have a general machloket about shoulders of streets next to a wall. The Eliezer thinks that they are the Reshut Harabim, and if you carry from there to the house, chayav. But anywhere else from the wall inside would be fine. And Chachamim say that this is considered your own space, not a Reshut Harabim, and therefore patur if you carry in. That's what it's talking about. Okay. Now, according to this, wait, if they're talking about the here's another picture. If they're talking about the shoulder, then let them talk about a general case of a shoulder. Why in the Mishnah talking about a case of a wall falling down? How is a wall falling down relevant to an argument about the shoulder? Yeah, well, if legal b'sidei reshut harabim ba'alma have amrinan ki pelige rabanan aled Rabbi Eliezer hanename hecha deika chipufeh aval hecha deleka chipufeh ema module kamashmalan. So if they only mention that they disagree regarding the shoulder and didn't talk about the wall itself, I would have said that the rabbis only disagree with Rabbi Eliezer when there are things sticking out of the wall, right? And they're boulders and stuff. But let's say it's a clear shoulder. Maybe the rabbis would agree with Rabbi Eliezer that it's called the Reshut Harabim because people can walk there easily. And so therefore, the Mishnah formulated it regarding a breach in the wall to show that even in that case, even in the case of the wall itself, where the space of the wall would be a machloket, and then I would know that it doesn't matter whether or not there in the shoulder there are rocks and boulders or not. The Chachamim would consider that not Reshut Harabim in any case. All right, so that's a possibility, except that Vaha mitocha ka'amad, right? According to, this is actually a question on both of them. The Mishnah says, if anyone carries mitocha, someone who carries from inside the courtyard to the house. Mitocha sounds like in the courtyard, anywhere in the courtyard, not just from the edge of the courtyard where the wall was or outside the wall. It says inside. And the Chachamim also say mitocha, so it means inside to the courtyard to outside. So mitocha doesn't fit with any of these interpretations that you just said. How are we going to solve that? Truth is that there's the rabbis that wanted to say mitocha because they said their law, anywhere in the courtyard out to the street is considered kadamilit, is patur. And since the rabbi said it, so Rabbi Eliezer also used the same word mitocha. But really, Rabbi Eliezer did not mean inside the courtyard, it meant the edge. All right, that sounds good, except that it's the wrong way around, because actually Rabbi Eliezer spoke first and Rabbanan spoke after. So the rabbis are responding to Rabbi Eliezer. So that's the next question. V'Rabbanan, right? Amar Rabbi Eliezer, sidei Reshut Harabim, u'mehaderu le'inhu mitocha. What do you mean? Rabbi Eliezer is the one that said, right, from the side. So Rabbi Eliezer said from the sides, and then the rabbis would answer mitocha, right? It doesn't work. They said that second. Why would Rabbi Eliezer say mitocha if they're speaking first? So rather, we have to reconstruct as follows. Hachikama le Rabbanan Rabbi Eliezer, mi la kamodit lan, hecha de tiltel mitocha l'reshut harabim, u'mereshut harabim letocha de patur. So the point why are Chachamim introducing mitocha? They're saying, don't you agree to Eliezer that if we carry from in the middle of the courtyard to the street or the other way around, patur? Why? Because it's karmelit. So too, you should agree with us that sideh nami lashena, that also the shoulder should belong to that, and that's why the rabbis in the Chachamim introduced the word mitocha, and so now we're just using the Eliezer use mitocha also, and so the Eliezer says hatam la kadaseh larabim hacha kadaseh larabim. Eliezer says totally different. Over here at the edge, lots of people are in fact walking there. It's public thoroughfare. Nobody's walking inside here, so it makes all the difference whether it's inside or outside, even though they all kind of belong to the person inside, and they're not really part of the main street. They're not. It's not like one of the lanes of the street. Okay, so that's the end of the discussion of this Mishnah, and what you see is that what was a fundamental machloket about this entire area, because it's open, and therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, should be the Shut Rabim. They bring Rabbi Eliezer more in line with Rabbanan that say no. If people are not walking through there, then you can't call it a Shut Rabim. Right? The question is, do you define a space by its architecture, a number of walls, or by its usage? In this case, it's not being used as a public thoroughfare, and so we want Rabbi Eliezer also to agree with that, and we're able to interpret it that way. All right, that's the end of the Mishnah, and the next Mishnah, which here we'll look back at our outline. This is a case where you have a breach not in one wall, but in two walls. Okay, so we'll see what difference that makes. I mean, on the face of it, why should it make a difference? If I have a breach in one wall, it's not enclosed anymore, right? So how is it any worse if there's a breach in two walls or four walls, right? Once you don't have we don't have four walls, it's no good. So we're going to see a machloket here, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yoseh. Rabbi Yehuda says if it falls on Shabbat, this keeps the status. Rabbi Yoseh says no, it becomes prohibited, which is kind of parallel to Rav and Shemuel, right? Rav would be like Rabbi Yoseh, Shemuel like Rabbi Yehuda. But the discussion in the Talmud is going to be about the breach of the walls. How big is the breach? Less than 10 amot, more than 10 amot? And we'll see Rav and Shemuel will have two different interpretations of it. All right, the Mishnah says, "Chaser shenifrasa l'shut rabim mishte ruchoteh, v'chen bayit shenifras mishte ruchotav, v'chen mavoi shenatlu korotav o lechayav, mutarim beoto Shabbat, v'asurim la'atid lavod, divrei Rabbi Eliezer." So three cases: a courtyard where two of the walls fell down, or a house, two of the walls fell down, or an alleyway where the front and back both fall down. Where the front and back of the cross beam fell down, okay, mutarim b'oto Shabbat. That Shabbat, if it fell on Shabbat, it's okay. You can continue carrying on Shabbat itself because you continue the permitted status. It was there before Shabbat. But in the future, it's no good. Next week, you got to go and build a wall again. You can't use it again next week. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosef Omer, im mutarim b'oto Shabbat, mutarim la'atid lavo. No, you can't say something is okay now, but bad next week. It's the same thing. It's the same status. Then therefore, if you're not going to permit it next week, which no one is going to permit it next week, it's not permitted this week either. So then he says, if the walls fall down on Shabbat, no good, you're out of luck. All right, so that's the Mishnah. Now, right, it seems the Mishnah has 2 points. One, things that fall on Shabbat, but also it mentions two walls falling down. That's what we're going to focus on. If it's 10 or less, then what's the difference if it's 1 or 2? What? If one wall falls down, damar pitrahu. If it's less than 10 amot, in a courtyard we're talking about, and then it's an opening, it's an entranceway. You're allowed to have less than 10 opening in a courtyard wall. So mishter chodami pitrahu. Fine, a courtyard can have it on two sides. It can have it on all sides. It can have openings that are less than 10 amot, and that wouldn't make it pasul. You could still carry there. So it can't be talking about less than 10. Ela biyater me'aser. Must be talking about it's bigger than 10 on two sides. So why are you saying it has to be two walls? Even if you have a big breach on one wall, it would already make it not a reshut hayachid anymore, and you wouldn't be allowed to carry. So what kind of case is talking about? Amarav le'olam be'aser, it is in fact 10 or less. Uchegon shenifresa bekeren zavit depitcha bekeren zavit la abdei inashe. And when it says it's open on two walls, it's not two opposite walls, but rather two adjacent walls. As follows, right? Here's what happened: this wall and this wall broke, but it's a corner, so it's only one breach. But even though in general, one breach that's less than 10 should be called an opening. But if it's in a corner, nobody makes an opening on a corner, right? You ever see a house where the front door is on the corner? Actually, I know a couple of houses like that, but they look really weird, right? Every time you pass by, like, why did they put that there? Okay, so therefore, no one would consider this to be an opening. This is simply although it's less than 10, it's a breach in the wall, and you cannot carry there. That's what it's talking about. That's the case. All right, no, pretty good. Okay, now next case. Now we have a case of a house also that has two walls. Okay, regarding a house, you cannot have an opening that's 10 amot. That's only a law for a courtyard. You can have something totally open, but a house, you have a different principle because the house has a roof on it. Well, as long as there is a roof, we have the principle that the roof, the edge of the roof, we consider it as if it comes down and creates a wall. So what's the difference between one side it's open and we would still allow it? So let's say two houses of the wall fall down. Okay, but the roof is still there. Well, then the edge of the roof can be considered a wall. So it should still be permitted to carry. Doesn't matter if it's one or two. Why did the Mishnah talk about cases of two? Amri de Rav Mishme de Rav. This is Rav's opinion. כגון שנפרס בקרן זווית וקריו באלכסון, דלק על הממר פי תקרה יורד וסותם. Oh, so again, it's talking about a corner, and furthermore, a corner where the roof is slanted. This is according to Rashi's interpretation, right? So the roof is slanted, and you have to fill in this side and this side in a slanted roof. That doesn't work. Okay, you cannot say, if it was like a wall over here and then a separate wall over here and the roof was flat, fine. But combining all these things, you cannot do that. So that's the case that it's talking about. There's actually a machloket. Here's what Rashi says it, right? That the roof is slanted. Others say that the roof is not slanted, but rather the roof is broken on a slant. And so, because the roof is broken on the slant, we do not apply this because the eye is not going to see it and say, "Oh, yeah, that should go down." Whereas if it's a nice straight roof with walls on the side, okay, then you see it's like a frame and you can pull it down. But in this case, you're not going to pull it down on an angle. It doesn't quite look like a full wall, even in imagination. That's Tosafot. Okay. Anyway, either way, the point is that is the case. And that's why it's talking about two walls. It has to be two walls in order for pitikra not to work. That concludes Rav's opinion. Now Shemuel has a different interpretation. Shemuel Amad afilu beyater me'aser. No, it could be talking about even more than 10, the breach. But if it's more than 10, then only even one side would make it prohibited. A courtyard with one side with a breach bigger than 10 is no longer a wall. So why is it talking about two? Mishum bait. Truth is, yeah, right. It could have said one, but it only mentioned two walls in the first case of courtyard because it wanted to mention two walls in the second case of bait that comes right after. All right, so let's deal with bait. Ubait kufetikshe, ma'ishne meruach achat, ramre pri tikra yored vesotem. Mishne ruchot nameh, nema pri tikra yored vesotem. So fine, so you want to explain it for a house, but in a house also, just like with one wall, it's no problem, because if one wall falls down, we consider the roof as the edge of the roof that comes down. If two walls fall down, also we'll apply the same thing. So there's no difference between one wall and two walls regarding a house. So the courtyard is only there for the house to be there, but the case of the house doesn't make sense either. And furthermore, that's one question. Second question on Shemuel. Shemuel does not even hold of the principle that the edge of the roof comes down. Rav Amar mutar letaltel bechula, u'Shmuel Amar en metaltelin ba ela ba'arba amot. We saw this case yesterday or 2 days ago. If you have a portico right in the middle of the desert, meaning it has a roof but no walls, right, only poles, then that's a machloket. Rav says you can carry in the whole thing because we consider all four sides to have the roof, the edge of the roof, as if it comes down. And Shemuel says you cannot carry in it because he does not hold of the principle that you can pull the roof down on all the edges. So now it has no walls. So see that Shemuel does not even hold of the principle at all. So that's the double question. If you do hold of the principle, then one wall broken or two walls broken should be fine. And you don't hold the principle at all, then also two walls or one wall will be not good. So what are you talking about with Shemuel here? Halakashya. We can answer the question. Kilet le with answer the second question. Kilet le be'arba. Aval b'shalosh itle. Shemuel only says that we cannot pull the walls down when all four walls are absent. That portico in the middle of the desert has no walls at all. You can't apply this this legal fiction to all the walls. But if you have one wall, then you could do it with the other three. Right. So therefore, one or two walls, he says, is fine. You can bring them down, and so that's why. That's why that's why it's okay. He does hold of the principle somewhat. All right, fine. So now we can bring it down, but we still have the other question because what's the difference between one and two? Right? If one wall falls down and you bring it down, and two walls fall down, and you also pull it down, so it should be fine. So mikom makom kashya. We still have that difficulty. Here's the answer. Kedamre be'rav mishemeh derav, kegon shenifras bekeren zavit bekerio ba'alachson, hachanameh, kegon shenifras bekeren zavit bekerio be'arba. Oh, we'll borrow an answer from Rav. Remember what we said about Rav before? He said the case of a house is where it's talking about that the corner, the two walls are adjacent walls, and it's the corner that fell, and the roof is on a slant. So we will borrow the concept, just change it a little bit. We're also going to talk about where the corner fell, but the way it fell down is has four edges to fill in. And Shemuel does not allow you to fill in four edges as follows, right? Imagine if it falls down like this. And so the roof, here's the two walls that fell down, and the roof fell down in such a way that you would need to fill in 1, 2, 3, 4 edges of the roof, right? And Shemuel said, fine, you can fill in edges of the roof. You can consider the edge as if it comes down for 1, 2, or 3, but not for 4 walls. Okay, he was originally saying that about 4 walls all around, but we're applying the same principle to edges that are right near each other. And so therefore, since it fell down in such a way, that's why it makes a difference that it was 2 walls that fell down, and that's why you cannot apply the roof coming down. Okay, so that is his response, and everything works. Just one last point here. Shemuel lo amar kirav. How come Shemuel doesn't agree with Rav's interpretation? Alachson la ketane, because it doesn't say anything about the roof being slanted. So why you're adding that in that the roof is slanted? Okay, Shemuel also had to add in his own other okimtot, but not that one. It should have said Rav lo amar kishmuel im ken avia le'achsadra. Rav did not agree with Shemuel because, according to Rav, you're allowed to fill in 4 imaginary walls, right, from the coming down. So, according to them, this case would be totally fine. You would be able to carry there, and that is why Rav does not agree with Shemuel. And how do we know that Rav would permit it? And then we just repeat the case on the principle. Rav says that you have a portico in the middle of a valley, you can carry in the whole thing, because you do bring the ceiling down. And Shemuel does not use that principle on all 4 walls, and that's why he would say not, and that's the basis. So the interpretation of our Mishnah depends on the principles that they apply to the portico in the middle of the desert. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen ve'amen.